2 Kings 19, beginning at verse 1. And when King Hezekiah heard, he tore his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and entered the house of the Lord. Then he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, with Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz. They said to him, Thus says Hezekiah, this day is a day of distress, rebuke, rejection. For children have come to birth, and there is no strength to deliver. Perhaps the Lord your God will deliver or hear all the words of Rabshakeh, whom his master the king of Assyria has sent to reproach the living God. And we will rebuke the words which the Lord your God has heard. Therefore offer a prayer for the remnant that is left. So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah. Isaiah said to them, Thus you shall say to your master, Thus says the Lord, Do not be afraid, because of the words that you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, so that he will hear a rumor and return to his land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land. As you know, King Hezekiah was one of the good kings of Judah. And it's amazing he turned out the way he is concerning how his father was. And we see here that the Assyrians have been conquering most of the area, the region of that world at this time. Hezekiah was king around 715, 722 BC. And he will see the fall of the northern kingdom. Actually, he's seen the fall of the northern kingdom as it was carried away. And if you go to the previous chapter here, in chapter 18, the first 6 verses, we see the faith of Hezekiah there. He came to the throne at 25 years old. He reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. He did right in the sight of the Lord, according to all his father David had done. He removed the high places, broke down the sacred pillars, cut down the Asherah. He also broke the pieces of the bronze serpent that Moses had lifted up in the wilderness. And you could imagine for about up to this point, they had that bronze serpent about 1,600 years. And they had turned it into this idol. This shrine, this idol. And so he saw that this bronze serpent that they had kept for that long, they had turned into this idol. And so he destroyed it. He destroyed it. They were burning incense to this thing. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. So that after him there was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor among those who were before him. For he clung to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord had commanded Moses. And if you look at the history of Judah, you know they had good kings and they had bad kings. And Hezekiah was just about one of the best kings that Judah ever had, save David, I guess you would put number 1. And so he was a man who wanted to do right. But we notice here, beginning of verse 7 of chapter 18, that the northern 10 tribes are carried away into captivity by the Assyrians. The Assyrian armies came through the north. They besieged the capital, which was Samaria at that time. They took Hoshea, the king, away into Assyria, and they destroyed that northern nation, dispersed the people and so forth, and sent them to other areas and brought other people in. After this happened, Hezekiah started doing a lot of reforms during this time and so forth, even after they're carried away. He goes up into that region. He invites them up there in that region. Come down, faithful Jews, to Judah and live with us. You don't have to live up there. You can live with us. And even in the time when Assyria was besieging the fortified cities in the north, he said, come to Judah for refuge, and we'll protect you. We'll try to protect you. And many Jews and priests and so forth went to Judah to find refuge there under the assault of the Assyrians. And we see here, however, beginning at verse 7, that the captivity takes place. We notice here in verse 11, and the king of Syria carried Israel away into exile to Assyria, and so forth. And it put them in Hala and Habath cities, if you will, that were far away, because, verse 12, they did not obey the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant. Even all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, they would neither listen nor do it. Now, after Assyria had taken care of the northern kingdom, they set their eyes on Judah. And they were going to treat Judah the same way. And the situation got real serious here in Judah. Real serious. They besiege Judah. And not only that, but they capture a lot of the fortified cities in Judah. They're occupying Judah. And then they bring their army up around Jerusalem, getting ready to besiege it. So they've conquered a lot of the cities that are in Judah already. The forts and the fortified cities, and the people are being put in subjection to the Assyrians. And really, the only large city left that's holding out is Jerusalem. So you can see how this massive empire has set its sights on this small nation, and they're going to take this nation like they did all other nations. And so they besiege Judah here, and Hezekiah tries to buy them off. So he says, I've done wrong. Withdraw from me whatever you impose on me, in verse 14. I will bear it. So the king of Syria required of Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. It got so desperate for the payoff that he cut the doors of the temple off that were made of gold to pay off the Assyrians, or to try to pay off the Assyrians to get them to leave. And it worked for a time, but the Assyrians, of course, came back. And so we see here that there is a besieging of Judah. And as we go through this, it talks about the fact that Rabshakeh, the leader of the forces of the Assyrians, says, you shouldn't rely on Egypt. You shouldn't trust in the Lord your God, because he's the one that's given you into our hands, which was actually at that point a lie. But you'll notice over here at the end of chapter 18, beginning in verse 28, Rabshakeh makes several arguments to the people of Jerusalem. He doesn't want to have a long siege. He wants them to give up. He don't want to sit there for months and months and months. He wants them to give up and just acquiesce to the situation here. And his first argument is, don't listen to Hezekiah. Hezekiah has been telling you to trust the Lord, your Lord, your God. Hezekiah has been telling you, now the Lord's going to take care of this. We need to trust in the Lord. Don't listen to Hezekiah. A second argument he gives here is that come and make peace and you will live. So if you give up now, then you'll live and you won't be killed. And then you'll be able, if you will, to, as he says here in verse 31, make your peace with me and come out to me, and each will have his vine and each of his fig tree, and drink each of the waters of his own cistern, and so forth, until I come and take you away to the land like your own land, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees. In other words, I'm going to take you away to a place that's just as good or even better than where you're living now. Okay. And he also talks about the fact that he says, do not believe your God, because your God has betrayed you. Your God is not going to save you in this situation. And by the way, no one has resisted us up to this point. All the nations that we have set our goal on, that we have set our sights on, has lost, even the Egyptians. So we have conquered many nations, nation after nation after nation. How in the world do you think that you're going to be able, if you will, to resist us? And so we have this situation where the Assyrians have conquered the northern tribes. They're gone. You have a nation, this powerful empire, that's coming with their armies. They're occupying Judah. the fortified cities. They've conquered fortified cities, and now here stands Jerusalem alone in the midst of Judah. A dire situation. The most dire situation that Judah has faced up to this point in their history, because they are on the brink of extermination. They are on the brink of being carried away, and at this point, there is, if it goes through as it seems by the world as it looks at it, there's not going to be any Messiah, because the king's lines will be cut off. Hezekiah, remember, is in the line of Christ. And so that's when we begin in verse 19. Hezekiah is under great distress here, and has a depression here. And he doesn't know what to do. He's surrounded by these armies, and he's trying to follow the Lord. He's a man who instituted reforms. He put it back in the Passover and did all away with the idols in the land, and yet this has happened. This has happened to the nation. And so Isaiah gives him some assurance. He says, all right, what's going to happen is the king of Assyria is going to hear a rumor that another kingdom is attacked. And then he's going to turn his attention to that place for a while. Now, this isn't going to solve the issue at all. Okay? This isn't going to solve the issue on long term, but it's going to solve the issue in the short term. We're going to see the long term issue here, how it's solved here in just a few moments. So, we see here in verses 8 and through 13 that Sennacherib there goes to war. He hears the rumor of the Tirhakah, the king of the Cush. They're attacking, and so he turns his attention there. But we see here that they are not done with Judah. They are not done with Judah. Because we see down here that Rabshakeh, who is the leader of the forces of the Assyrians, sends a letter to encourage the people of Judah not to trust Hezekiah. And so we see here in verse 10, thus you shall say to Hezekiah, king of Judah, he's sending messengers to Hezekiah, this Rabshakeh, who is the leader of the forces of the Assyrians. Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you, saying, as Jerusalem will not be given in the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands, destroying them completely. So will you be spared? Behold, you've heard all this. Did the gods of those nations which my fathers destroyed deliver them? And he lists these nations here that they conquered. Where is the king of Amath, the king of Arpad, the cities of the Sheraphim, and the Hannah and the Iva? Where are these cities now? They're all part of the Assyrian Empire. Every one of them. So the messengers bring this letter to Hezekiah, saying, we're going to conquer you. You're going to be a part of us. You're not going to be able to resist us. And so what does Hezekiah do? Verse 14. He takes the letter and he goes into the house of the Lord and he spreads it out on the ground. Notice here in verse 14. Then Hezekiah took the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it and went up to the house of the Lord and spread it out before the Lord. And so we see here that Hezekiah prays to God. Verse 15 of chapter 19. Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, O Lord, the God of Israel, who are enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ears, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see, and listen to the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to reproach the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have devastated the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire. For they were not gods, but the works of men's hands, wood and stone, so they have destroyed them. Now, O Lord our God, I pray, deliver us from the hand, that all the kings of the earth may know that you alone, O the Lord, is the Lord our God. So I can't even talk tonight. We want to emphasize the fact of how dire a strait this is. What's happening here and what God does. Again, Jerusalem stands alone. The entire nation has been occupied by the most powerful empire on the face of the earth at that time. Their armies cannot be matched even by Judah, except with God, of course. Any army on the face of the earth, they can't match them. They've conquered nation after nation after nation after nation, dozens of nations, hundreds of cities. And here they are surrounding Jerusalem with this army. Left to their own devices, Jerusalem stands about as much chance as a worm under your boot. Okay? Put it bluntly. A worm, a bug that you're going to squish under your boot stands a better chance than them of getting out of this by worldly standards. Okay? But Hezekiah prays, Lord, you're God. The nations that they conquered, the gods that they thrown in the fire, they're wood and stone. They're not gods. You are the one. And I'm asking you, notice what he says in verse 90. He's asking God to deliver him. Deliver us from his hand, that all the kings of earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are God. And so we see how Hezekiah prays the prayer, and then we notice here in verse 20, Isaiah comes back, or sends a message back. Then Isaiah the son of Amoz sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, because you have prayed to me about Sennacherib, he's hard to pronounce. It's Sennacherib. That's how you pronounce that. King of Assyria, I have heard you. And then in verses 21 through 28, he talks about the fact that God is not going to let this happen. That the Assyrians have mocked the virgin daughter of Zion, that is, Judah. And we see here how they have blasphemed the words of the Lord. They have haughty eyes. They have come up against the Holy One of Israel in verse 22. Their messengers have been a reproach to the Lord. They have many chariots. You say you have many chariots in verse 23. That you have come to the heights of the mountains, to the most parts of Lebanon. And I cut down its tall cedars, its choice cypress, and I entered its farthest lodging, its thickest forest. I dug wells and drank foreign waters. And with the sole of my feet I have dried up all the rivers of Egypt. The Assyria, I've done this and I've done that. I've drunk out of your cisterns. I have eaten your crops. I have cut your timber. I have conquered your cities. The arrogance of the Assyrians. But God says in verse 25, in sort of a clever way, in the way I look at it, he said, have you not heard? Long ago I did it. From ancient times I planned it. Now I have brought it to pass, that you should turn fortified cities into ruined heaps. Therefore their inhabitants were short of strength. They were dismayed and put to shame. They were as the vegetation of the field and as the green herb, as grass on the housetops is scorched before it has grown up. Don't you know that everything you've done you couldn't have done unless I let you do it? That it was in my overall plan from long ago that things happen this way. Don't you know it's not you, it's me? That you have strength because I gave you strength, and you conquered those nations because I allowed you to do so? Verse 27. But I know you're sitting down and you're going out and you're coming in and you're raging against me. Because of your raging against me and because your arrogance has come to my ears, therefore I will put my hook in your nose and my bridle in your lips, and I will turn you back the way you came. In other words, because of all of this, you're not going to take my city. You're not going to take my virgin daughter Zion. It's not going to happen. Because I control everything. God controls everything. And the arrogance that you have to think that it's you that you can do anything that I do not allow to happen. And so, there's a sign that God's going to bring this about. Because if you are under siege, and you're under siege for a long period of time, there's one thing you can't do is plant crops. Right? And so, if you don't plant crops at the right time, at the right season, then what's going to happen to your population? You're going to starve to death, right? So God is going to make assurance to his people. Notice what he says in verse 29. Then this shall be the sign for you. You will eat this year what grows of itself. In the second year what springs up from the same. And in the third year you sow, you reap, you plant your vineyards, and you eat fruit. In other words, I'm going to make sure you're fed for 2 years so you won't starve. Isn't that great? Isn't that a great assurance from God to his people? I know you're under siege. I know your country has been ravaged. I know you haven't had a chance to plant crops, but you're not going to starve to death because I'm going to make sure you have enough to eat for 2 years. And upwards into the third year because they've got to plant again, right? And so, verse 30, the surviving remnant of the house of Judah will again take root downward and bear fruit upward. For out of Jerusalem will go forth a remnant, and out of Mount Zion survivors. The zeal of the Lord will perform this. Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he will not come to this city or shoot an arrow there. He will not come before it with a shield or throw up a siege ramp against it. By the way that he came, by the same way he will return, and he shall not come into this city, declares the Lord. Notice, for I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. Why for his servant David's sake? Because of the promise that he made that his kingdom would endure forever. Is that what he promised David? That his kingdom would endure forever? And we see that through Jesus Christ, do we not? For David's sake, for the promise that I made to him and the promise I made that through him would come the Messiah. They're not going to take this city. And so notice what God does to save it. Most powerful empire on the face of the earth, besieging Jerusalem. Judah is occupied. Notice verse 35. Then it happened that night that the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. Let's read that again. Then it happened that night that the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the men rose early in the morning, behold, all of them were dead. That army that surrounded the city lay dead. Can you imagine seeing 185,000 dead bodies around your city? That's the population of Lexington, Kentucky. Guys, around your city. So you can see the dire straits that they were in. So Sennacherib departs. They leave Judah. Would you? They leave. He departs and returns home. Basically, he calls his army, he calls all these others that are that had occupied Judah home, and he leaves them, if you will, there. God performs a great miracle like the miracles of old, like parting the Red Sea, like sending the hail upon the armies of the kings that resisted Joshua to save his people from extermination. From extermination. So what spiritual lessons can we learn from this story here? I think one spiritual lesson that we can learn, several of course, but one lesson that we can learn is that righteous leaders can turn a nation around. They can. Righteous leaders can turn a nation around. Hezekiah's dad was not good, to say the least. He was one of the bad kings of Judah, if you will. But Hezekiah did more good for Israel up to that point than anyone save David himself. He reinstituted the Passover feast that had been neglected. He cleansed the temple. He got rid of every single idol and shrine in Judah. Not only that, but he went north into Bethel and those places and destroyed those things, destroyed those shrines up there as well. After there was a power vacuum, he went up north, if you will, and took care of some things up there as well. He turned around an entire nation by his leadership. Righteous leaders can turn a nation around, and that is still true today. The right leadership can turn a nation around. Number two, even the best of us make mistakes, right? His mistake was he turned to Egypt for help. That broken reed, if you will. God, time and time again, don't make foreign alliances. Don't rely on Egypt. Of course, one of the reasons that Judah was invaded is because they made an alliance with Egypt. He did make an alliance with Egypt, and he tried to pay him off. It was another mistake. God didn't tell him to try to pay him off. So he tried to pay him off. Didn't work. Sometimes the best of us make mistakes, right? But even though he's God's man, even though he did what was right, he made mistakes. I think another lesson that we can learn is prayer is always the answer, isn't it? Amen. Prayer is not one of the answers. Prayer is not a possible answer. Prayer is always the answer in every situation. Period. And sometimes we treat prayer like, well, I guess I better pray about this situation. Well, that's true, but shouldn't we pray about all situations? Isn't prayer the answer in all situations? Prayer is always the answer. And so Hezekiah prayed to God, help. That's basically what he said in his prayer. He says, help, help. We need help. And God answered. And I think a fourth spiritual lesson that we can learn from this story is that there is no impossible with God. With men it is impossible. With God all things are possible, right? There is no impossible with God. Sometimes we try to put God in a bottle and say, well, obviously this has to be solved this way, or it can't be solved, or this or that, or whatever situation in our life, or something that's happening. But there's no impossible with God. Whatever it is. I can imagine the children of Israel against the Red Sea. I always think about that movie. I always think about the Ten Commandments movie. There they are against the Red Sea. They're trapped. They're going to be annihilated by the Egyptian army. They're not warriors. They're going to be annihilated. And there they are against the sea on this side, the Egyptians on the other side. We know that the Lord was holding them off with the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. But still, there they were. How are we going to get out of this? We've got the sea on this side and we've got the Egyptians on this side. What did God do? Parted the Red Sea. There is no impossible with God. Oh, our nation needs to turn around. I don't see how it's going to happen. There's no impossible with God. And if we think we think that God is not be able to do what He wants to do, then where's our faith? There is no impossible with God. None. Hezekiah. A good man, a good king, a king who made mistakes. But nonetheless, God delivered him and that nation so that we could sit here today. You realize that the Assyrians had taken Jerusalem at that point and destroyed the kingly line, and none of us would be sitting here today. That the messianic promise hung on one moment in history. Just like baby Josiah, right? Just like baby Josiah. So with these thoughts in mind, if there's anyone here this morning, it's night, isn't it? It's morning, getting morning somewhere in the world, isn't it, Jeremiah? So technically that's right. So if there's anyone here this evening that needs to respond in any way, please come as we stand and sing this song.